A century of maritime dominance and a global empire of blood vanished in a single afternoon. The Bratva king didn't lose his fleet to a rival or the government. He gave it all away just to see her smile again. Is one woman's joy truly worth liquidating a sovereign armada? The freezing docks of Busan whispered secrets that only the dead were allowed to keep. In this sprawling, neon-drenched harbor where the Korean coastline bled into the icy depths of the East Sea, absolute power did not wear a suit or carry a briefcase. It wore black tactical gear, smelled of salt and gunpowder, and answered to the name Kang Hyun-woo. To the underworld of Eurasia, he was the apex predator, the undisputed Bratva boss whose syndicate controlled every shipping lane, drug route, and weapon cache stretching from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg, and down through the clandestine ports of East Asia. His empire was built on iron, blood, and an unyielding frost that had frozen his soul long before his 25th birthday. He owned container ships the size of skyscrapers, private islands off the coast of Vladivostok, and enough capital to buy small nations. Yet, for all his billions, his world was a monochromatic abyss of gray steel, cold monitors, and the eternal hum of diesel engines idling in the dark. Hyun-woo stood at the panoramic window of his command penthouse overlooking Pier 14, his sharp, aristocratic Korean features illuminated by the crimson glow of security alarms. His dark eyes, devoid of any warmth, scanned the horizon where a dozen ice-reinforced freighters sat at anchor. These vessels carried billions in contraband, anchored by a legacy of violence passed down through generations of ruthless bosses. He had inherited the throne at 21, executing 3 treacherous uncles in a single night to secure his reign. Since then, he had never smiled, never hesitated, and never felt a single pang of remorse. He was a machine of pure, unadulterated dominance, a ghost haunting the maritime underworld. And then, she walked into his hell. Amina dialed back her memories of the sun-baked, vibrant streets of Lagos, where the air tasted of roasted plantains and salt spray from the Atlantic, contrasting sharply with the biting, merciless wind of Busan. She had arrived in South Korea 3 years ago on a scholarship, full of bright dreams, a degree in international maritime logistics, and a fierce, infectious laugh that could light up the gloomiest room. But dreams in the brutal corporate underworld of international shipping were cheap currency. Her integrity had made her a target. Refusing to falsify cargo manifests for a corrupt shipping conglomerate tied to the Bratva, she had uncovered a massive human trafficking and illicit arms ring. Instead of being silenced permanently, a fate reserved for the inconvenient, she had been broken down slowly, her spirit battered by intimidation, job losses, and finally, a staged car accident that took the life of her younger brother, leaving her isolated, hunted, and drowning in a suffocating depression. When Hyun-woo's enforcers brought her to his underground facility, suspecting she possessed encrypted files of their operations, they expected a spy. Instead, they brought him a ghost. Amina sat in the center of the interrogation room, not trembling in fear, but staring blankly at the scarred steel table, her vibrant spirit completely extinguished. The trauma had stolen her voice, her laughter, and the brilliant smile that had once defined her existence. Before we dive deeper into how a cold-blooded Bratva king chose a ruined life over a billion-dollar empire just to chase a ghost of joy, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and drop a comment below telling me, would you give up everything you own for love? Trust me, you do not want to miss where this story goes. So make sure you are subscribed to Afro Soul Stories for more epic journeys. Hyun-woo watched her through the one-way mirror, a strange, unfamiliar knot tightening in his chest. In his world, weakness was purged. When people broke, you discarded them. But looking at Amina, he saw something terrifying, a reflection of his own internal desolation. She was a prisoner of circumstance, just as he was a prisoner of his throne. He ordered her released from the cell, moving her not to a dungeon, but to the guest quarters of his fortified compound. Not out of mercy. Mercy was a foreign language to the Bratva boss, but out of an inexplicable, gnawing curiosity. He wanted to know how a soul so vibrant could be reduced to ash, and more importantly, He wanted to see if the fire inside her could ever be reignited. Days turned into weeks within the silent, heavily guarded compound. Hyun-woo kept his distance, observing her from the shadows like a hawk watching a wounded fawn. Amina barely ate, staring out the reinforced glass window toward the distant docks where the cargo cranes moved like giant metallic praying mantises. She was fading away, slipping through the cracks of a world that had chewed her up and spat her out. Hyun-woo realized with a cold shock that if something didn't change, she would simply stop breathing. The realization infuriated him. He was a man who commanded legions. He could overthrow governments, manipulate global markets, and crush his enemies with a flick of his wrist. Yet, he was entirely powerless to fix the hollow look in the eyes of an ordinary African woman who didn't even know his real name. One stormy evening, as thunder rattled the reinforced glass of the penthouse, Hyun-woo broke his own rule. He stepped into her quarters unannounced, carrying a simple plate of warm food and a cup of ginger tea, reminiscent of the traditional remedies she used to buy from street vendors in Lagos, details his intelligence network had painstakingly dug up. "You are starving yourself," Hyun-woo said, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the silence of the room like a blade. Amina didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head, her deep brown eyes meeting his cold, piercing gaze. There was no fear in her expression, only a profound, bottomless exhaustion. "Starving is just a slower way of dying," she whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. "And in this place, death is a luxury." Hyun-woo set the tray down on the table, stepping closer. For the first time in his life, the invincible Bratva boss felt the crushing weight of his own monstrous legacy. "You think I brought you here to break you? You didn't have to," Amina replied softly, a bitter, humorless smile touching her lips. "Your world already did that." Those words struck him harder than any bullet ever could. The sheer accuracy of her accusation pierced his armor. He looked at her, really looked at her, past the oversized clothes, past the circles under her eyes, past the haunted aura, and he saw the remnant of the woman she used to be. A woman who laughed loudly, who danced to rhythms he had never heard, who loved life with a passion that terrified his calculated, transactional existence. "Eat," Hyun-woo commanded, his voice softening just a fraction, a crack in the monolith of his intimidation. "If you die in my house, it ruins my evening." Amina looked at the tea, then back at him. A faint, ironic spark flickered in her eyes. "You're a monster, aren't you?" "The worst kind," Hyun-woo replied without hesitation, turning toward the door. "Eat the tea. Tomorrow we go outside." The next morning, defying every security protocol of the Bratva syndicate, Hyun-woo ordered his heavily armored convoy to stand down. He dismissed his guards, put on a simple woolen coat, and walked back into Amina's room. She looked up in surprise as he tossed a bright, mustard-yellow scarf onto her lap, a stark contrast to the sea of black and gray that dominated the Korean winter. "Put it on," he ordered. "We are leaving." "Where?" she asked, clutching the fabric, feeling its unexpected warmth. "To the place where you forgot how to smile." The drive out of Busan took them away from the industrial docks and winding coastal roads, deep into the quiet, mist-shrouded countryside where terraced green hills met the jagged cliffs of the southern coast. Hyun-woo drove the unmarked sedan himself, a rare breach of security that left his second-in-command, Victor, sweating bullets back at headquarters. But the Bratva boss was beyond caring about operational safety. The cold obsession that had driven him to conquer the maritime underworld was shifting, morphing into something far more dangerous. A singular, reckless fixation on curing the melancholy of one woman. Amina sat in the passenger seat, the bright yellow scarf wrapped around her neck, staring out the window as the stark, urban concrete gave way to rolling landscapes. The silence between them wasn't oppressive anymore. It was heavy with unspoken tension, a fragile bridge built over an abyss of violence and survival. "Why are you doing this?" Amina asked quietly, her eyes reflecting the passing trees. "Men like you don't take scenic drives with captured logistics analysts." "What's the angle?" Do you want the encryption keys to the shipping databases? Because I flushed them down a toilet in Seoul 6 months ago. Hyun-woo kept his eyes on the winding asphalt, his grip on the steering wheel steady. I don't care about the databases, Amina. I have 1,000 databases. I wanted to see if the wind out here still sounded like anything. She turned her head, studying his sharp profile. There was a raw, unyielding hardness to him, the kind forged in the fires of betrayal and bloodshed. Yet, beneath the terrifying aura of the underworld king, she sensed a profound, echoing loneliness, a solitude even deeper than her own. You're just as trapped as I am, aren't you? She murmured, almost to herself. Hyun-woo didn't answer, but the slight tightening of his jaw confirmed her suspicion. He pulled the car off the main road onto a secluded gravel path that led to an abandoned cliffside observatory overlooking a churning, sapphire-blue bay. The wind howling off the ocean was fierce, biting at their faces, carrying the crisp scent of salt and pine. They stepped out of the vehicle, the gale instantly catching Amina's coat. She shivered, pulling the yellow scarf tighter. But for the first time in years, she didn't look down at the ground. She looked out at the infinite expanse of the ocean meeting the sky. Hyun-woo stood beside her, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, watching her face. In my world, beauty is a liability, he said over the roar of the wind. Everything is measured in tonnage, profit margins, and body counts. I built an empire on the backs of broken men and sunken ships. But looking at you, I realized I built a kingdom on a graveyard. Amina turned to him, the icy wind whipping her dark braids across her face. And you think bringing me to a cliff is going to redeem you? You think a view can wash the blood off your hands? Kang Hyun-woo? No, he replied, his dark eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity. The blood doesn't wash off. But I am willing to burn the entire empire to ash if it means hearing you laugh the way you did the day you arrived in this country, before my syndicate destroyed your life. Amina caught her breath. The audacity of his words, spoken with the absolute, chilling certainty of a man accustomed to life and death executions, hung heavily in the air. For a fleeting second, the heavy fog pressing down on her chest parted. A tiny, involuntary sound escaped her lips, half a sigh, half a chuckle. It was small, fragile, and utterly foreign, but it was there. Hyun-woo heard it. To a man who had spent his life listening for the click of a hammer or the hum of a boat engine, that tiny sound was louder than a cannon shot. His chest tightened, a strange, electric current shooting down his spine. He wanted more. He needed more. Before either of them could speak, the peaceful isolation of the cliffside was shattered. The harsh roar of approaching engines ripped through the air. 3 black SUVs crested the hill, skidding to a halt and blocking the only exit path. Heavy doors slammed shut in unison. From the vehicles emerged a dozen heavily armed men clad in unmarked tactical gear, their assault rifles raised. Sergei, a ruthless high-ranking commander from the Vladivostok faction who had long sought to overthrow Hyun-woo, stepped out from the lead vehicle, a cold, predatory smirk plastered across his scarred face. Well, 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 Sergei called out, his voice carrying over the wind, flanked by his enforcers. The Bratva king taking a romantic stroll at the edge of the world. Rumors in the syndicate say you've gone soft, Hyun-woo. They said you've been neglecting the shipping routes, ignoring the arms shipments, all to play nursemaid to some runaway African girl. Hyun-woo didn't flinch. He didn't reach for the concealed firearm beneath his coat. His expression remained carved from granite as he slowly stepped in front of Amina, shielding her with his broad frame. Sergei, you always did lack imagination, coming all the way to South Korea just to die in the cold. You're outnumbered, Hyun-woo, Sergei sneered, raising his pistol. Your empire is crumbling from the inside out. Hand over the ledger keys, step aside, and maybe, just maybe, we'll let you crawl back to Russia with your life. But the girl stays. She's the catalyst for your downfall. Amina's heart hammered against her ribs. Fear, cold and paralyzing, flooded her veins. This was it. The violent underworld she had tried so hard to escape had finally caught up to them, and she was the direct cause. She reached out, gripping the sleeve of Hyun-woo's coat. "Hyun-woo, run. Leave me. You can take them, you have your men." "My men are miles away," Hyun-woo interrupted softly, not looking back at her. His eyes remained fixed on Sergei. Then, he let out a low, dark chuckle that sent a chill down the spines of the opposing hitmen. "You think I built an empire by relying on luck, Sergei? You think I didn't know you were plotting? Bluffing won't save you," Sergei began, raising his hand to signal the attack. Before Sergei could give the order, a deafening series of explosions echoed from the valley below. Red flares shot into the gray sky, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy gunfire. Sergei's radio crackled to life with panic screams from his backup detail. Their escape route was cut off, their supply trucks destroyed, and an elite loyalist counterstrike unit had descended upon them from the ridge. Hyun-woo's face remained an unreadable mask of absolute coldness. "You wanted my empire, Sergei? Take a good look at it. It's built on fire." In a blur of motion, Hyun-woo drew his weapon, firing twice with lethal precision before Sergei's men could recover from the shock. The skirmish was brief, brutal, and utterly one-sided. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized, the snow around the cliffside stained crimson. Hyun-woo stood amidst the chaos, his breathing controlled, his coat fluttering in the wind. He turned back to Amina, who stood frozen, staring at the carnage in absolute shock. The violence of his world was laid bare before her, raw, unapologetic, and absolute. "Are you hurt?" Hyun-woo asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle as he stepped toward her. Amina looked from the fallen men to the dark, intense eyes of the Bratva boss. She should have been terrified. She should have bolted down the cliffside. Instead, a strange, wild realization washed over her. This terrifying warlord had risked his life, his throne, and his empire not for profit or power, but to protect her. And for the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight in her chest completely shattered. She looked at him, and against all odds, she smiled. It wasn't a small smirk or a polite gesture. It was a bright, radiant, soul-shattering smile that illuminated the gloomy cliffside like the midday sun. Hyun-woo froze. The world around him seemed to stop spinning. The wind died down, the crashing waves fell silent, and in that single, eternal second, the Bratva king knew his fate. He would burn down every ship, sink every fleet, and turn his entire global empire to ash if it meant he could spend the rest of his life watching her smile like that. The safe house in downtown Seoul was a masterclass in modern fortification disguised as a minimalist architectural masterpiece. Floor-to-ceiling smart glass, biometric security locks, and soundproofed concrete walls ensured that the chaos of the outside world remained entirely locked out. Yet, inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. Amina sat at the kitchen island, sipping a cup of hot honey ginger tea while watching Hyun-woo move around the sleek, industrial kitchen with surprising dexterity. The man who commanded thousands of armed operatives across Eurasia, who could negotiate multi-billion-dollar arms deals with a cold stare, was currently trying and struggling to scramble eggs. Amina let out a soft, genuine giggle, the sound bubbling up naturally. If your syndicate bosses could see the fearsome Bratva king defeated by a frying pan, they'd mutiny by morning. Hyun-woo paused, holding a spatula like a tactical weapon, before a rare, almost imperceptible shadow of a smile touched the corner of his lips. He turned off the burner. Let them. The empire was never worth as much as the sound of you laughing. The words hung in the air, rich with heavy, unspoken implications. Since that afternoon on the cliffside, everything had shifted. The cold, transactional distance between them had dissolved into something raw, intense, and undeniable. An unbreakable bond forged in the fires of mutual survival and unexpected affection. Amina's spirit had returned in full force, her resilience shining brighter than ever, reminding Hyun-woo of what true humanity felt like. But in the underworld, peace was merely the prelude to a storm. Before you find out how Hyun-woo pulls off the most insane, multi-billion-dollar liquidation in criminal history just to buy her a permanent safe haven. Take a quick moment to hit that like button, subscribe to Afro Soul Stories, and drop a comment telling me, what is the craziest thing you would do for love? Let me know below, and let's keep this epic journey going. The secure comms terminal on the wall suddenly flared to life, flashing a crimson emergency warning. Victor's voice burst through the speaker, frantic and breathless. Boss, we have a catastrophic breach. The Moscow Council has caught wind of the cliffside incident. They know you executed Sergei. They've frozen all primary syndicate accounts, and a high-level tribunal is en route to Busan right now. They're demanding you step down immediately, or they wipe out everything, including the Korean division. Hyun-woo stepped away from the kitchen counter, his demeanor instantly hardening back into the cold, calculating strategist. The illusion of domestic peace vanished in a heartbeat. Let them come, Hyun-woo replied, his voice dropping into an icy register. Tell the council I am no longer interested in their throne. Amina's expression tightened as she set her mug down. She walked over to him, her eyes searching his face. What does that mean, Hyun-woo? The Moscow Council. They won't just step down. They'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. You built this empire over a decade. You can't just throw it away. Watch me, Hyun-woo said, grabbing his tactical jacket. He pulled out his encrypted satellite phone, bypassing Victor entirely, and dialed a secure, encrypted frequency connected to international maritime authorities, rival syndicates, and corporate shell entities across the globe. Hyun-woo, what are you doing? Amina asked, her voice laced with sudden panic as she realized the magnitude of his intention. I'm resigning, he said simply, his dark eyes locking onto hers with unwavering resolve. For 10 years, I traded my soul for a fleet of gray ships and a mountain of blood money. Every container, every weapon, every port, it was all a cage. A cage I put myself in. He reached out, his calloused hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray lock of hair. I spent my whole life being the richest monster in history. But wealth is worthless if you can't buy back your peace. And most importantly, it's worthless if it can't buy your safety. You're going to liquidate everything? Amina breathed, her eyes widening in disbelief. The entire maritime fleet? The global shipping routes? You'll be a target to every criminal syndicate on the planet. Let them come, Hyun-woo replied, a fierce, reckless grin spreading across his face. The first true, unrestrained smile she had ever seen on him. I'm trading every last ship, every billion-dollar account, and every ounce of power I ever held. For a clean slate. For a ticket out of this hell. And for one more reason. What reason? She whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. To see you smile like that every single day for the rest of my life. Without waiting for her reply, Hyun-woo turned back to the terminal. Over the next 6 hours, in an unprecedented display of financial and logistical warfare, the Bratva king initiated a total liquidation of his global empire. He transferred billions in syndicate assets into humanitarian relief funds across West Africa and East Asia, dismantled the secret shipping lanes, and broadcasted an open-source decryption key of every illicit route straight to international law enforcement and rival cartels alike. In a single afternoon, the most powerful maritime syndicate in history collapsed from within, imploding by the very hand of its creator. The Bratva didn't lose their king to a coup or a government raid. Their king simply walked away, leaving behind a smoking ruin of empty bank accounts and ghost ships. By midnight, the safe house alarms began to wail. The Moscow Council's elite hit squad had breached the perimeter, swarming the building with assault rifles and tactical gear, expecting a fortress of ultimate power. Instead, they found an empty room, a smoking communications terminal, and a single handwritten note resting on the kitchen island. Written in crisp, cold Korean script, "The throne is vacant. I've retired." The warm African sun beat down gently on the bustling, vibrant streets of Lagos, painting the colorful market stalls in brilliant shades of gold and amber. The air was rich with the irresistible aroma of sizzling spices, roasted plantains, and the distant, rhythmic hum of urban life. Laughter echoed from a nearby courtyard where children played football barefoot on the red earth, their bright, joyful shouts blending harmoniously with the lively beats of Afrobeat music drifting from a storefront radio. Amina stood on the balcony of a bright, airy apartment overlooking the lively neighborhood, a steaming cup of local hibiscus tea in her hands. The haunting shadows of her past in Busan, the cold steel, the armed guards, the crushing weight of trauma, felt like a lifetime ago, washed away by the healing warmth of her true home. Footsteps approached from behind, steady and quiet, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a warm, solid chest. A chin rested softly on her shoulder, inhaling the familiar scent of jasmine and sea salt in her hair. "You're smiling?" Hyun-woo murmured, his deep voice carrying a quiet contentment that he had never known in the frozen halls of his former empire. Amina leaned back against him, turning her head to press a soft kiss to his cheek. She looked out at the sun-drenched Lagos skyline, marveling at how a man who once commanded fleets of warships had adapted to the chaotic, beautiful rhythm of West Africa. He wore a simple linen shirt instead of tactical gear, his dark eyes now holding warmth instead of frost. "I am," Amina whispered, her voice laced with absolute joy. "I was just thinking, you gave up billions, a global empire, absolute power. Do you ever regret it? Even for a second?" Hyun-woo tightened his embrace, burying his face in the crook of her neck, letting out a low, contented chuckle that vibrated through his chest. "Regret walking away from a life of bloodshed to stand right here with you?" He pulled her slightly closer, turning her around so she was facing him directly. He looked down into her deep brown eyes, his gaze filled with a fierce, unwavering devotion. "Amina, I spent my entire life being the richest Bratva boss in history, and I was the poorest man alive. Now, I don't own a single ship, I don't control a single port, and my bank accounts are completely empty." He paused, a brilliant, radiant smile breaking across his handsome face, the kind of smile that could rival the African sun itself. "And I've never been wealthier." Amina threw her head back and laughed, a rich, full, echoing sound that filled the bright afternoon air with pure magic. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down into a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their past away forever. In the end, empires fall, gold turns to dust, and power is nothing more than a fleeting illusion. But true wealth isn't measured in tonnage or territory. Sometimes, it's found in the simple, breathtaking miracle of trading an entire world of darkness, just to see the one you love smile again.